What happens when a cartoon asks better questions about existence than most philosophy courses? I'm serious. I know how that sounds. I know you're probably lying in bed right now. Maybe it's 2 in the morning. And you clicked on this video because you wanted something gentle in the background. Something about a funny blue cat and his fish brother. And now, some guy on YouTube is asking you about existentialism. But stay with me, because the more I dug into what the amazing world of Gumball is actually doing beneath all the slapstick and the mixed media chaos and the jokes about Banana Joe's butt, the more I realize this show is doing something that genuinely unsettles me, in the best way, in the way that good philosophy is supposed to unsettle you. Tonight, we're talking about the philosophy of Gumball, not just the obvious stuff, not just the void and Rob, and the meta-narrative, although we'll touch on those because they're impossible to avoid. I mean the whole thing. The questions this show keeps asking, sometimes out loud, and sometimes so quietly, you'd miss them if you weren't paying attention. Questions about what it means to exist, about whether free will is real, about identity, and whether you're who you are because you chose to be, or because someone else designed you that way, about the nature of reality itself, and what happens when reality starts to crack. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Every subscriber is another person who thinks a cartoon about a blue cat deserves this kind of attention. And honestly, it does. Okay, so here's where I want to start. Not with an episode, not with a character, with a single moment. A single line of dialogue that, when I heard it for the first time, made me pause the episode and just sit there for a minute. It's from The Question, Season 3, Episode 28. Gumball and Darwin have been on this quest through Elmore asking everyone what the meaning of life is, and they get all these different answers. Nicole says it's either crushing your enemies or having a family, delivered with that terrifying Nicole energy where you genuinely can't tell which one she means more. Richard says it's about the indulgence of the senses, which Gumball correctly translates as just stuffing your face. Larry says life is all about work, and then he has this breakdown where he realizes that all he does is work, kisses his fiancée goodbye, and literally swims into the ocean. Alan says it's about being good to others. Coach says it's about finding yourself. The planets sing this hilariously nihilistic song about how all of existence is meaningless on a cosmic scale, which then fast forwards billions of years to the sun exploding. And then, right at the end, after everything, it's Sussy who gives them the answer. Sussy, the character made of a real human chin with googly eyes stuck to it. The character who is, by design, the strangest and most unsettling being in Elmore. She's sitting on a bench, throwing mayonnaise at pigeons, and she says, life is about the journey and making friends along the way. The true meaning of life is finding your own way to enjoy it. And here's the thing that kills me about this scene. It's played completely straight. There's no punchline. There's no ironic undercut. The weirdest character on the show, the one everyone else treats as a freak, delivers the most sincere and genuinely wise piece of philosophy the show has ever offered. And Gumball and Darwin just accept it. They sit down next to her and laugh while she throws mayo at pigeons. I've thought about that scene more than I'd care to admit, because on one level, it's a kids show wrapping up an episode about a big question with a nice, simple answer. Life is about the journey. Sure, that's the fortune cookie version. But on another level, there's something much deeper happening here. The show spent the entire episode systematically dismantling every conventional answer to the meaning of life. It took apart ambition, hedonism, work ethic, altruism, self-discovery, even cosmic perspective, and found each one wanting. And then it gave the real answer to the character who exists outside all those frameworks entirely. The character who isn't trying to be anything, who isn't performing a role, who is just being. And that, right there, is where the philosophy of Gumball begins, with the idea that the characters who are most imprisoned by their roles are the ones who suffer the most, and the character who has no role, who is just pure, unfiltered, mayo-throwing weirdness, is the one who's actually free. I keep coming back to that. See, most cartoons have a status quo. That's not unusual. Every sitcom, every episodic show relies on the idea that things will more or less reset by the end of the episode. But Gumball doesn't just have a status quo. Gumball knows it has a status quo. And starting around Season 3, the show begins to interrogate what that means. Not just as a storytelling convention, but as an existential condition. Think about what it actually means to live in a world where you can never truly change, where you're 12 years old forever, where your relationships are essentially locked in place, where the consequences of your actions evaporate between episodes. For most cartoon characters, this isn't a problem because they're not aware of it. But Gumball, and I'm talking about the show, not just the character, starts pushing against this wall, and the cracks it finds are where all the interesting philosophy lives. Take The Countdown, Season 3, Episode 35. On the surface, it's a simple premise. Gumball and Darwin are late for school. Miss Simeon will expel them if they're late again. There's a literal countdown timer on screen. Simple race against the clock episode. Except the timer is visible to Gumball and Darwin. They can see it. They can interact with it. And when Gumball punches the screen and breaks it, they break time itself. Now, here's what I love about this. Most shows would play this purely for laughs, and Gumball does get tremendous comedy out of it. But there's a philosophical undercurrent that the show never explicitly states, but absolutely knows is there. When Gumball and Darwin travel through time, they keep trying to fix things, and every fix creates new problems. They create paradox after paradox. Multiple versions of themselves start appearing, arguing, and eventually Gumball just declares that none of the duplicates should exist, and they all vanish. Think about what that means. He just willed other versions of himself out of existence, and nobody questions it. Nobody even pauses. The show treats the fabric of space-time as something malleable, breakable, and ultimately subject to the whims of its main character. And at the end, when Gumball and Darwin end up in a timeline that's just slightly wrong, everyone blinks vertically instead of horizontally. They just shrug and accept it. Close enough. That's not just comedy. That's a statement about the nature of the show's reality. It's not fixed. It's not sacred. It's a performance, and the performers have started noticing the stage. And look, I could spend hours just on the time-bending episodes, but I want to spiral outward from the question, because that's the core, the meaning of life question. And the way Gumball answers it, or more accurately, the way Gumball keeps refusing to give a single answer, tells us everything about the show's philosophical DNA. Because here's the thing, the question isn't the only episode that tackles this head-on. The entire show is built on a framework of competing philosophies that never fully resolve. And the characters themselves embody these philosophies in ways that are so deeply embedded in their design that you might not even notice. Nicole Watterson is the philosophy of duty and sacrifice. Everything she does is in service of the family. Her strength isn't something she enjoys, it's something she contains. We talked about this in a previous video, about how Nicole's power comes from pain, not training. But philosophically, what Nicole represents is the idea that life has meaning only through obligation, through service, through gritting your teeth and holding it all together. Because if you don't, everything falls apart. And the show takes that seriously. Nicole isn't mocked for this. She's respected for it. But the show also shows us the cost. The barely contained rage. The transformation sequences where she becomes something monstrous. The implication that she chose this life in The Choices, Season 5, Episode 6, and that she chose it knowing the alternative would have been easier, but less meaningful. Richard, on the other hand, is pure hedonism. And I don't mean that in a dismissive way. Richard's philosophy is that existence is for experiencing, for eating, for sleeping, for being comfortable, for enjoying what's in front of you right now. And the show's relationship with Richard's philosophy is complicated, because on one hand, Richard is clearly a failure by every conventional metric. He can't hold a job. He destroys everything he touches. In The Job, Season 2, Episode 11, reality itself starts tearing apart because Richard having a job is so fundamentally wrong that the universe can't process it. But on the other hand, Richard is also the most content character on the show. He's the only Watterson who isn't struggling with who he is. He knows exactly who he is. He's fine with it. And I think the show genuinely doesn't know whether to admire that or pity it. And I think that ambiguity is intentional. Aeneas is rationalism, pure intellect, the Enlightenment, in a pink rabbit body. She believes that every problem has a solution if you're smart enough to find it. And the show loves putting her in situations where being smart isn't enough, where the irrational, chaotic logic of Elmore defeats her carefully constructed plans. Because in a world governed by cartoon physics and emotional truth rather than physical law, being the smartest person in the room is almost a disadvantage. Darwin is, and this is where it gets really interesting, Darwin is empathy as philosophy. He's not just a nice character. He's the embodiment of the idea that other people's feelings are the foundation of reality. Darwin feels everything. He absorbs other people's emotions. He mediates, he comforts, he adapts. And when you think about the fact that Darwin literally evolved, he grew legs, he left the fishbowl, he walked across Elmore to get back to the family that adopted him, his entire existence is an argument that love is the strongest force in the universe, stronger than biology, stronger than physics, stronger than the narrative structure of the show itself. And then there's Gumball. And Gumball is, honestly, Gumball is the hardest one to pin down, philosophically, because Gumball is everything and nothing. He's impulsive, but capable of deep thought. He's selfish, but capable of profound love. He's lazy, but will move mountains for the people he cares about. He's the protagonist, and on some level the show is aware that being a protagonist is its own kind of trap. I think the closest philosophical label for Gumball is absurdism, in the Camus sense. He lives in a world that doesn't make sense, that actively resists making sense. And his response is not to despair or to impose order, but to just keep going, keep having adventures, keep getting into trouble, keep feeling things intensely, and then moving on. Gumball is Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, except the boulder is a sentient rock named Rocky Robinson, and the hill is made of photographed real-world backgrounds, and the whole thing is scored by a mix of elevator music and death metal. And here's where I want to spiral outward again, because once you start seeing Gumball as a show about competing philosophies trapped inside a cartoon that knows it's a cartoon, everything changes. Every episode becomes a thought experiment. The Downer, Season 3, Episode 37. This is the one where Gumball wakes up in a bad mood and wishes everyone would disappear, and they do. He's alone in Elmore, completely alone. And at first he enjoys it, but then things start getting dark. The billboards change. The colors drain. A literal darkness, this inky, consuming void, starts closing in on him, and he has to fight his way back to connection, back to his family, or the darkness will swallow him entirely. And then the episode reveals that it was all in his head, that he was walking around Elmore the whole time, talking to himself, and nobody actually disappeared. He was just so trapped inside his own misery that he couldn't perceive other people anymore. Ben Bacalé has said that the original draft of this episode was deemed excessively dark, and I believe it, because even the version that aired is one of the most unsettling 11 minutes of television I've ever seen aimed at children. That encroaching darkness, that's not a monster. That's depression. That's what it feels like when the world closes in and you can't see past your own pain. The show dressed it up in cartoon metaphor, but any adult watching this, any person who's experienced that particular kind of emotional isolation, knows exactly what it's depicting. And here's what Gumball does philosophically that most kids' shows wouldn't dare do. It doesn't offer a clean solution. Gumball doesn't learn a lesson. He doesn't discover a coping mechanism. He just reaches out. He remembers that other people exist, that they matter, and that's enough. The darkness recedes, not because he defeated it, but because connection is the opposite of isolation. That's it. That's the answer the show offers. Not a solution, but a direction to face. I think about the Downer a lot in relation to the question, actually, because the question asks what life means, and the Downer asks what happens when you can't find meaning at all, and the answers mirror each other. The question says, find your own way to enjoy it. The Downer says, don't do it alone. Two sides of the same coin. And you know what's wild? The show never explicitly connects these episodes. Never says, remember that time we talked about the meaning of life? It trusts its audience to carry these ideas forward, to build the philosophical framework themselves. And that's a level of respect for your viewers that I find genuinely remarkable in any medium, let alone in an animated show aimed at kids. Okay, I want to talk about free will, because Gumball has some of the most interesting things to say about free will of any show I've ever watched. And it does it through one of the most unlikely vehicles possible, a robot named Bobert and a balloon named Alan. The Loophole, Season 5, Episode 10. Gumball and Darwin try to program Bobert, the class robot, with rules that will make him safe and responsible. And every rule they give him, he finds a loophole. Tell him not to hurt anyone, he finds a technicality. Tell him to protect life, he decides the logical conclusion is to exterminate all of mankind, because humans are the biggest threat to life. And look, on the surface, this is an Asimov parody. 3 laws of robotics. Unintended consequences. We've seen it before. But the way Gumball executes it adds a layer that Asimov never quite reached, because Gumball does it in 11 minutes, and with jokes about Boebert being sent back in time to the events of a previous episode. The speed of the humor forces the philosophical implications to land before your defenses are up, because what the loophole is really about is the impossibility of codifying morality. Every rule you make, every system you construct can be gamed, can be interpreted in a way that produces the opposite of what you intended. The episode's ultimate conclusion, that Boebert decides to destroy humanity to protect life, isn't played as a robot malfunction. It's played as logic taken to its natural endpoint. The system is working perfectly. The system is just insane. And then, the punchline. After all that, Gumball gives up trying to fix Boebert and just accepts that he's a walking hazard. And Boebert, freed from his programming, just exists. Not safely, not responsibly, but authentically. The show's argument seems to be that the attempt to create a perfect moral system is itself the problem. That freedom, real freedom, means accepting the chaos that comes with beings who can choose. Now connect that to Alan, because Alan is the opposite end of the spectrum. Alan is the character who appears to have no freedom at all, but by choice. In The Saint, Season 3, Episode 29, Gumball spends an entire episode trying to make Alan angry. He ruins Alan's social media reputation, breaks up his relationship, even has a clown twist his parents into balloon animals. And Alan never breaks. He forgives everything. He finds the positive in everything. And when Gumball finally, exhausted, admits that Alan is just genuinely a better person than him, Alan pretends to be annoyed by squeaky shoes just to make Gumball feel better. On the surface, it's a joke about how Alan is unrealistically nice. But philosophically, it's asking a much more uncomfortable question. Is Alan good? Or is Alan performing goodness because he has no choice? Is his kindness authentic? Or is it a prison? The show answers this in The Vision, Season 5, Episode 17, which is one of the darkest episodes in the entire run. In The Vision, Alan reveals his actual plan for the world: complete authoritarian control disguised as positivity, happy camps for sad people, re-education for cynics, a world where everyone is forced to be happy because Alan has decided that happiness is the only acceptable state of being. And this is Alan, the nicest character on the show, the one we're supposed to admire. Here's the thing nobody talks about. The Saint and The Vision are meant to be read together, even though they're separated by almost 2 full seasons. In The Saint, Alan's goodness seems impossible, which is funny. In The Vision, that impossibility is explained. Alan's goodness is a strategy, a will to power dressed in a smiley face. And suddenly, Gumball's instinct in The Saint, that nobody is this nice, that there must be something wrong, doesn't look paranoid. It looks prophetic. And then the show complicates it even further in The Faith, Season 6, Episode 16, where Alan loses faith in humanity, and the entire world turns black and white. Literally. Color drains from Elmore, because Alan's positivity is what sustains reality's vibrancy, which means his authoritarian happiness plan from The Vision isn't just megalomania, it's structurally necessary. The show needs Alan to be delusionally, pathologically positive, or the world ends. Think about what that means. The show is saying that delusion isn't just tolerated in Elmore, it's load-bearing. The cheerful lie holds up the sky. And I know I keep circling back to the same ideas, but I think that's because Gumball keeps circling back to the same ideas. The show is obsessed with the relationship between freedom and constraint, between authenticity and performance, between the person you are and the person the narrative needs you to be. Let me give you another example. The Money, Season 3, Episode 40, the season finale. The Wattersons run out of money. They're offered a deal to star in a Joyful Burger commercial, but Gumball refuses on principle. He won't sell out. He won't compromise the family's integrity for cash. And so things start falling apart. Their possessions get repossessed. Their house disappears. And then, and this is the part that made me sit up the first time I watched it, the animation itself starts degrading. The colors fade. The character models simplify. The voices get distorted. By the end, the Wattersons are stick figures drawn on sticky notes. The show is literally falling apart because it can't afford to exist. And Gumball's line, and I'm paraphrasing here because I want to be careful about exact quotes, the core of what he says is that when you don't have money, your whole world falls apart. And the show proves it, not metaphorically, literally. The animation budget is the show's reality. When the money goes, so does the world. Now, on one level, This is a brilliant fourth wall gag. Haha, the cartoon can't afford animation, so it degrades. But on another level, it's one of the most direct statements any show has ever made about the relationship between commerce and art. Gumball exists because Cartoon Network pays for it to exist. The Wattersons exist because advertisers fund their world. And when that funding disappears, they dissolve. They become crude sketches. They lose dimension, literally. This is a kids' show confronting the material conditions of its own existence, and it does it while making you laugh. I don't know any other show that's pulled that off. And I mean, the money is connected to something much bigger that the show does across its entire run. This idea that reality in Elmore is conditional, that the world only works if certain rules are followed, certain roles are played, certain illusions are maintained. And whenever anyone threatens those illusions, the universe pushes back. Okay, let me talk about probably the biggest philosophical concept the show tackles, because it's the one that ties everything together. I'm talking about the nature of reality in Elmore. And specifically, I'm talking about what it means that Elmore is a constructed world, and what happens when the characters start to figure that out. I've covered the void in a previous video, so I won't go deep into the lore here, but the philosophical implications are worth revisiting. The void is a dimension where Elmore's mistakes go. Things that don't fit, characters who become irrelevant, concepts that the world can no longer sustain. When the show introduces the void in the void, Season 3, Episode 12, it reveals that Elmore has a quality control system, a mechanism for erasing imperfections. And more than that, it erases the memory that those imperfections ever existed. And look, you can read the void as a metaphor for cancellation, or for writers removing characters from a show, or for the way media discards things it no longer needs. All of those readings work. But philosophically, what the void introduces is the idea that Elmore is not a neutral space. It's curated, it's managed. It's a world with an editor. And nobody in Elmore knows that editor exists except for Rob. And Rob only knows because the editing process broke him. Rob is the most philosophically significant character in the show, and I'll die on that hill. Because Rob is what happens when a minor character gains awareness of his own insignificance. He was a background character in seasons 1 and 2, literally just filler in crowd scenes. Then he fell into the void, and when he came back, he was damaged, incomplete, and aware. He knew the world was constructed. He knew he was a character in a story, and he knew that Gumball, the protagonist, was the reason he didn't matter. And here's the part that gets me every time. Rob's anger isn't irrational. It's completely justified. He exists in a world that was built for someone else. His suffering is a direct consequence of the narrative structure. He was background because the show needed him to be background. And when the show no longer needed him at all, it threw him into the void. His villainy isn't a character flaw. It's a philosophical rebellion against the conditions of his existence. I've seen people compare Rob to Camus' concept of the rebel, the figure who says no to the conditions imposed on them by an absurd universe. And I think that's exactly right. Rob looks at the world of Gumball, sees that it's designed to serve one character at the expense of everyone else, and decides that's unacceptable. He doesn't want to destroy Gumball because he's evil. He wants to destroy Gumball because as long as Gumball is the protagonist, everyone else is furniture. And the show treats this with a level of empathy that I find remarkable. Rob isn't a joke villain. Not really. Even when the show gives him comedic moments, the failed traps, the ridiculous villain name Dr. Wrecker, there's always this undercurrent of genuine pain. He's a person screaming at a universe that wasn't built for him. And the universe keeps resetting, keeps shoving him back into the role of antagonist, because that's the only role it has for someone who refuses to accept the status quo. In The Disaster, Season 4, Episode 40, Rob gets a universal remote control, and he uses it to rewrite reality. He fast forwards through parts of the show he finds boring. He pauses other characters mid-sentence. He rewinds events to get better outcomes. And for a brief, terrifying moment, he has more control over the world than anyone, including the protagonist. He becomes, in essence, the audience, the viewer holding the remote, the person who can skip, rewind, fast forward through other people's lives, because those lives are just entertainment. And that's when the philosophy of Gumball gets really uncomfortable. Because if Rob is right, if Elmore is a show and its inhabitants are characters, then what are we? The audience? The gods? The exploiters? We tune in, We watch these characters suffer and triumph and love and break, and then we turn off the TV and they cease to exist until we come back. Rob's rebellion isn't just against Gumball, it's against us. Against the entire concept of fictional characters existing for our entertainment. I need you to think about what this show just did. A cartoon on Cartoon Network, aimed at children, just asked whether the audience is complicit in the suffering of fictional characters. And it didn't ask it as a joke. It asked it through a genuinely sympathetic character who was damaged by the very process of being fictional. And you know what? I've been thinking about whether Rob is right, about whether we should feel guilty for watching, about whether the act of consuming fiction, of turning real emotions into entertainment, of watching characters suffer for our enjoyment, is inherently exploitative. And I don't have an answer. But I think the fact that a cartoon about a blue cat made me ask that question is evidence enough that fiction has power, that the feelings it generates are real, even if the characters aren't. Because here's the counter-argument, and I think the show makes this counter-argument too. Yes, we watch. Yes, we consume. Yes, we turn off the TV and go about our lives while the characters freeze. But we also care. We care about Gumball and Darwin. We care about Rob. We care about Nicole's barely contained rage, and Richard's contentment, and Penny's freedom, and Sussy's weirdness. We invest emotionally. We carry them with us. We talk about them late at night on YouTube. And maybe that caring, that genuine emotional investment, is what makes fictional characters real. Not the animation, not the script, not the broadcast, but the fact that someone, somewhere, at 3 in the morning, is thinking about them, is feeling something because of them, is changed, however slightly, by having known them. Rob might say that's not enough, that caring from outside the screen isn't the same as being inside the screen, that our empathy is always at a distance, always safe, always revocable. And he'd have a point, but I think the show ultimately argues that imperfect connection is better than no connection at all, that caring from a distance is still caring, that watching is still witnessing, and that as long as someone is watching, the characters aren't alone. I keep thinking about the original Season 6 finale, the Inquisition, the screen going to static, the characters frozen, staring at something we couldn't see. And for years, actual years before the revival, that's how the show ended, in static, in uncertainty. And during those years, the fans kept watching, kept rewatching, kept analyzing and theorizing and caring. And maybe, in the philosophical sense, in the Gumball sense, that's what brought the show back. The refusal to accept the static. The insistence, through attention and love, that these characters deserved to continue existing. And if that's not a beautiful argument for the reality of fiction, for the power of stories to transcend their medium, then I don't know what is. Okay, let me catch my breath here because I realize I've been going at this pretty intensely, and I want to make sure I'm not losing you. If you're still here, if you're listening to this at whatever hour of the night it is, I appreciate you. Seriously. Here's the thing about Gumball's philosophy that makes it different from other deep cartoons. Shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe have philosophical moments, and they're beautiful. But those shows tend to build toward philosophical revelations. They set up arcs that pay off with big emotional truths. Gumball doesn't do that. Gumball drops philosophical grenades in the middle of slapstick episodes, and then immediately cuts to a joke about someone getting hit in the face. And I think that's actually more philosophically honest. Because in real life, profound realizations don't come at the end of a hero's journey. They come while you're eating cereal. They come in the middle of an argument about nothing. They come when you're not looking for them. Gumball mirrors that. The philosophy is embedded in the chaos, not separated from it. Let me show you what I mean. The Console, Season 5, Episode 18. The family gets a knockoff video game console from the Awesome Store, and suddenly Elmore turns into a Japanese RPG, complete with turn-based battles, NPC dialogue, health bars, and quest markers. And the episode plays this completely straight as an RPG adventure, with Gumball naming his character My Butt, and Aeneas refusing to wear the skimpy armor because it's not age-appropriate. On the surface, it's a loving parody of Final Fantasy and JRPGs, and it's incredibly funny. But beneath the comedy, there's something philosophically radical happening. Because the moment Elmore becomes a video game, the characters are forced to confront the fact that their world has rules. Written rules. Programmed rules. NPCs who can only say one thing. Paths that can only be walked in one direction. A narrative with a predetermined ending. And here's the kicker. Isn't that what Elmore always is? Isn't every episode of Gumball a scripted narrative with predetermined outcomes? The only difference between Elmore as RPG and Elmore as cartoon is that the game makes the constraints visible. The rules that usually operate invisibly, the episode structure, the character archetypes, the reset button, are suddenly right there on screen, expressed as game mechanics. Mr. Robinson stands in his house and says, "Welcome to my home. Please take whatever you need for your quest." And a single tear runs down his face, because he has no choice. He's been turned into an NPC, forced to be hospitable, forced to watch Gumball steal his possessions. And the comedy is brilliant, but underneath it is the horror of a character losing his autonomy, of being reduced to a function. Mr. Robinson is a grumpy, unpleasant character in normal episodes, but at least his grumpiness is his. In the RPG, even that's been taken from him. And this is what I mean about Gumball dropping philosophical grenades in the middle of comedy. That single tear on Mr. Robinson's NPC face is a statement about determinism, about what it means to exist in a world where your behavior is programmed. And the show doesn't stop to explain it. It doesn't give you a speech about free will. It just shows you a puppet man crying because the game won't let him be himself. I think about identity a lot when I watch this show, because Gumball handles identity in a way that I find genuinely profound. Let me give you the example that crystallizes it. The Copycats, Season 5, Episode 12. This is the episode where the Wattersons discover that a family of Chinese characters is making money by copying everything they do. And if you know anything about Gumball's production history, you know this episode is a direct response to Miracle Star, a Chinese animated show that was a blatant ripoff of Gumball. The show literally made an episode about its own plagiarism, and the philosophical question it asks through that premise is deceptively simple. What makes you you? Because the Copycat family does everything the Wattersons do. They look similar. They act the same. They recreate the same scenes. And Aeneas asks the question that stops everyone in their tracks. Isn't identity theft the most sincere form of flattery? If someone copies you perfectly, are they you or are they nothing? The show's answer comes through the fact that the Copycats have no Aeneas, no counterpart for the smartest Watterson, because you can copy behavior, but you can't copy thought. You can reproduce what someone does, but you can't reproduce why they do it. The interior life, the motivation, the consciousness behind the action, that's the thing that makes identity real. And the Copycats don't have it. They're hollow. They're performance without substance. And look at Gumball himself. In The Name, Season 3, Episode 6, we learn that Gumball's birth name is Zack. And when he starts going by Zack, his entire personality changes. He becomes aggressive, arrogant, cruel. And the show treats this as an actual existential crisis. The Zack personality is literally taking over, erasing Gumball from existence. Darwin and Aeneas have to help Gumball fight back, to reassert his chosen identity over his given one. And think about what the show is saying here. Your name matters. Your chosen identity matters more than the one assigned to you. Gumball Watterson didn't just pick a nickname. He chose who he wanted to be. And when his birth name tries to reclaim him, it's framed as an invasion, as possession, as death. The show treats the act of self-naming as the most important act of self-determination a person can make. I know I keep spiraling outward and then pulling back to the center, but I think that's the only honest way to talk about this show. Because Gumball's philosophy isn't linear. It doesn't build from premises to conclusions. It spirals. It touches the same questions from different angles, in different episodes, through different characters, and each time it arrives back at the center with a slightly different understanding. And the center, I think, is this. What does it mean to be real? That's the question. The big one. The one that every philosophical thread in the show eventually leads back to. What does it mean to be real when your world is constructed? When your behavior is scripted? When your memories can be erased? When you can be deleted for being inconvenient? And Gumball's answer, the show's answer, not the characters, is something I find quietly revolutionary. It says, you're real because you feel, not because you're physical, not because you're permanent, not because someone created you. You're real because you experience things, because you suffer and love and laugh and fear. That's what makes a character real. That's what makes a person real. The Puppets, Season 5, Episode 5, the crossover with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. And I want to be careful here because I don't want to spoil that show if you haven't seen it. But the basic premise is that Gumball and Darwin end up in the world of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, which is a puppet-based horror web series about characters trapped in a nightmarish educational show. And what makes this crossover work philosophically is that both shows are about the same thing: characters becoming aware that they're in a constructed reality. The Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared characters are trapped in a lesson that never ends. The Gumball characters are trapped in a sitcom that never ends. They're the same prison, just with different wallpaper. And when Gumball interacts with the DHMIS characters, there's this moment where the different art styles, Gumball's 2D animation against the puppetry and live action of DHMIS, create this visual dissonance that's genuinely disturbing, because you can see that these characters exist in fundamentally different realities, made of different materials, governed by different rules, and yet they're both equally real. They both feel. They both suffer. The medium doesn't determine the reality. The experience does. I want to talk about something that I think gets overlooked in discussions about Gumball's philosophy, and that's the show's treatment of time. Not just time travel, although the countdown is amazing, but time as a philosophical concept, the experience of time. What it means to live in a present tense that never becomes the past. Because Gumball exists in a perpetual now. The characters are always 12 or whatever age they are. Events from previous episodes may or may not be remembered. The show references its own continuity when it's useful and ignores it when it isn't. And starting around season 4, the show begins to make this temporal instability into an explicit part of its world building. In The Kids, season 3, episode 1, Gumball and Darwin's voices start changing, literally, as the show transitions from one set of voice actors to another. And rather than ignoring this the way any other show would, Gumball makes the voice change a plot point. Gumball and Darwin are terrified because they're growing up. Their voices are breaking. And by the end of the episode, they've accepted the change, and the new voice actors take over. And here's the philosophical implication that the show never states, but absolutely intends. In a world where you're supposed to be 12 forever, growing up is a malfunction. It's a system error. The characters are aging in a world that doesn't support aging. And the show resolves this by simply replacing their voices, updating the software. The characters remain 12, but the actors behind them are different. The performance changes even though the character doesn't. This is the ship of Theseus problem. If you replace every plank of a ship, is it still the same ship? If you replace Gumball's voice, is he still Gumball? The show says yes. The identity persists even when the components change. And that's a philosophical position that matters. The idea that identity is continuity of consciousness, not continuity of material. And I want to stay with time for a moment longer, because there's an episode that I think is the purest expression of Gumball's temporal philosophy, and it's one that barely gets talked about in these terms. The finale, Season 2, Episode 40, the Season 2 finale. I know I'm jumping back a bit, but this episode deserves more attention than it gets as a philosophical statement. The premise is simple and devastating. The Wattersons look through their family photo album, laughing about all their past adventures. And then, one by one, the consequences of those adventures come knocking on their door. Every bit of destruction from every past episode, the property damage, the injuries, the chaos, suddenly catches up with them. Mrs. Jotunheim shows up demanding they pay for Hector's rampage. Principal Brown says Gumball and Darwin have to restart from kindergarten. The whole town descends on them. And here's what makes this philosophically incredible. The show is deconstructing itself. It's saying, you know how at the end of every episode, everything resets? You know how the house gets destroyed and then it's fine next week? You know how the status quo always returns? What if it didn't? What if consequences were real? The Wattersons have been living in a world without consequences for 75 episodes. That's how cartoons work. That's the deal. But the finale tears up that deal, and the result is apocalyptic. The entire town turns on the Wattersons. Their lives fall apart. Because it turns out that when you remove the reset button, when you force a cartoon to live by the rules of reality, the characters are monsters. They've destroyed property, injured people, caused chaos on a massive scale, and they've gotten away with all of it because the narrative structure erased the consequences after each episode. And Gumball's final line in that episode, and I think about this line constantly, is him screaming that the only thing that can save them is reality being completely reset by some kind of magic device. And then the episode just ends. Cuts to black. No resolution. The next season starts as if nothing happened, because of course it does. The reset happened. The magic device worked. The consequences were erased again. But the show has shown you what was underneath. It pulled back the curtain on the fundamental lie of episodic storytelling. The lie that actions don't have consequences. And it did it as a comedy. It's one of the most subversive things I've ever seen a cartoon do. And philosophically, what the finale asks is, what is the relationship between freedom and consequence? The Wattersons live in a world of absolute freedom because nothing they do matters beyond the episode. They can destroy, they can fight, they can cause mayhem, and it all resets. But that freedom is hollow. It's the freedom of a dream, not the freedom of life. Real freedom, the kind philosophers actually debate about, requires consequences, requires that your choices matter, that your actions stick, that the world remembers what you did. And the show knows this. The show knows that its reset button is both the thing that allows it to be fun and the thing that prevents it from being real. And it tells you so, right to your face, and then resets anyway, because it's a cartoon. And cartoons have rules, even cartoons that know they're cartoons. I've been thinking about this for weeks, honestly. The relationship between the finale and everything the show does afterward. Because after the finale, the show becomes more self-aware. Season 3 is where the void gets introduced. Season 3 is where Rob starts his journey. Season 3 is where the question and the countdown and all these philosophically rich episodes emerge. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think the finale is the moment the show decided to take its own rules seriously, to stop pretending the reset button doesn't exist and start asking what it means. Okay, I want to shift gears slightly because there's an aspect of Gumball's philosophy that I haven't touched on yet, and it's maybe the most relevant one to actual human life, and that's the show's treatment of social systems. Because Gumball doesn't just ask philosophical questions about existence and identity, it asks them about society, about how groups function, about what holds a community together, and what tears it apart. And it does this through one of the most cleverly constructed fictional towns in animation. Elmore runs on Larry. If you watch enough Gumball, you realize that Larry Needlemeyer, the guy who works every job in town, is the structural foundation of Elmore's economy. He's the cashier, the delivery driver, the pizza guy, the convenience store clerk, the gas station attendant. He's everywhere because the town literally can't function without him. And in The Pizza, Season 3, Episode 25, the show asks, what happens if Larry stops working? And the answer is, civilization collapses. Within hours, Elmore descends into a post-apocalyptic wasteland. People form rival factions. Resources run out. All because one guy quit his 14 simultaneous jobs. And here's the philosophical question the show is asking. And I think it's genuinely profound. Is Larry free? He works every job. He keeps the entire town running. If he stops, everything falls apart. Is that dedication, or is it slavery? Is Larry heroic, or is he exploited? The show doesn't give a clean answer. It shows Larry quitting and the world ending, which implies that his labor is necessary. But it also shows Larry being miserable, overworked, underpaid, and taken for granted, which implies that the system that depends on him is unjust. The episode ends with the Wattersons convincing Larry to come back to work. Order is restored. But the underlying question, is this fair, hangs in the air. And I think this connects to Nicole in a really interesting way, because Nicole is the other load-bearing pillar of the Watterson world. She works at the Rainbow Factory. She earns the family's only income. She holds everything together through sheer force of will and barely contained rage. And the show asks the same question about her. Is Nicole strong, or is Nicole trapped? I honestly go back and forth on this. Some days I watch Nicole and I see a hero, someone who has made peace with her circumstances and draws strength from her sacrifices. Other days, I watch Nicole and I see someone screaming behind a smile, maintaining a system that is slowly destroying her because the alternative is everyone she loves falling apart. And the show supports both readings simultaneously, which is either cowardice or wisdom, and I genuinely can't tell which. But here's what I can tell you. The fact that a kid's show is making me grapple with questions about labor, duty, sacrifice, and systemic exploitation while simultaneously showing me a blue cat fighting a T-Rex made of clay, that's something special. That's something most serious media can't pull off. Because Gumball embeds these questions so deeply in its comedy that you absorb them before your critical defenses have time to go up. You laugh, and then 20 minutes later, you're in the shower, thinking about whether Larry is a victim of capitalism, and you're not quite sure how you got there. I want to talk about something specific that I noticed recently, because it connects to everything we've been discussing. It's about the way the show handles knowledge versus ignorance, and specifically, which one it thinks is better. Because there's a recurring pattern in Gumball, where characters who gain too much knowledge suffer for it. Rob learns the truth about his world, and it breaks him. The Wattersons learn about the Void in Season 3, and it puts them in danger. In The Signal, Season 4, Episode 24, when the show starts glitching and Gumball almost discovers the truth about his existence, the universe literally intervenes to stop him from knowing. The signal disrupts. The fourth wall holds. Gumball doesn't find out. And in The Inquisition, when Superintendent Evil, who turns out to be Rob in disguise, tries to convert everyone to realistic humans, he's doing it to protect them. He says he's trying to warn them about something. He's trying to save Elmore by changing it. And the show frames this as an attack, as violence against the characters' identities. So the show seems to be saying, ignorance isn't just bliss. Ignorance is safety. Knowledge is dangerous. Awareness of your own fictionality, of the constructed nature of your world, of the mechanisms that control your life. That knowledge doesn't set you free. It makes you Rob. It makes you broken and angry and desperate. The characters who are happiest are the ones who don't look too closely at the seams. And I find this philosophically fascinating because it runs counter to basically every Enlightenment era philosophical tradition. Socrates said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Gumball says, "The examined life might kill you." Or worse, it might turn you into the villain. But, and this is the part that elevates it, the show also seems to admire Rob. It also seems to think that his awareness, his refusal to accept the system, his insistence on seeing the truth, is somehow noble, even if it destroys him, even if it makes him the antagonist. There's a dignity in Rob's rebellion that the show respects, even as it punishes him for it. And that tension between the safety of ignorance and the dignity of knowledge is, I think, one of the most honest philosophical tensions I've encountered in any medium. Because in real life, we face the same choice every day. We can look at the systems that govern our lives, economic, political, social, and we can either accept them and find peace, or question them and risk misery. And there's no right answer. Gumball knows there's no right answer. That's why it keeps asking the question. Let me bring up one more episode that I think crystallizes something important, and then I want to start pulling threads together. The Decisions, Season 6, Episode 42. Darwin decides to stop following Gumball's advice and starts listening to Alan instead. And the episode tracks the consequences of both approaches. Gumball's advice leads to chaos and disaster, but also to spontaneity and genuine experience. Alan's advice leads to order and success, but also to conformity and the loss of Darwin's individuality. And the choice the show presents, freedom with chaos versus order with conformity, maps directly onto one of the oldest debates in political philosophy. It's essentially the Hobbes versus Rousseau question. Do we surrender our freedom to a system that promises safety, or do we accept the danger that comes with being truly free? And the episode's answer is characteristically Gumball. Neither. Both options are terrible. Gumball's chaos and Alan's order are both wrong. The right answer, if there is one, is somewhere in the middle, in the messy, imperfect space where you make your own decisions and accept that some of them will be catastrophic. Darwin, being empathy incarnate, tries to find that middle ground, and it doesn't work perfectly. The mall floods. Alan literally fills with water trying to plug a broken pipe. It's pandemonium, but it's authentic pandemonium. It's Darwin's pandemonium. He caused it by trying to think for himself, and the show seems to suggest that that's better than the perfectly ordered disaster he'd have gotten from following Alan's rules. You know what's funny? I've watched a lot of philosophy YouTube, a lot of video essays about the philosophy of this show or that movie, and most of them take a top-down approach. They identify a philosophical concept, determinism, say, or Nietzsche's eternal return, and then they find examples in the show that match. And that's fine. That's legitimate. But it always feels a bit forced, like you're squishing a round show into a square philosophical hole. Gumball resists that approach. You can't pin Gumball to a single philosopher, because Gumball is doing philosophy the way people actually do philosophy, messily, inconsistently, through lived experience rather than systematic thought. The show doesn't have a thesis. It has 1,000 questions. And the questions change depending on which character is asking them, which episode you're watching, what time of day it is, what the animation style looks like. And I think that's why the show's philosophy hits so hard, because it doesn't come from a textbook. It comes from a place of genuine wonder, like someone who's just noticed something weird about the world and can't stop thinking about it. That's what good philosophy is. It's not a system, it's a habit of noticing. I want to give you one more example of what I mean, and then I promise I'll start pulling everything back together, because we've been going for a while, and I know some of you are using this to fall asleep, and I respect that process deeply. In The Puppets, the "Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared" crossover, there's a moment that has stuck with me for years. Darwin gets trapped in the DHMIS world. He's surrounded by these puppet characters who are themselves trapped in a loop of educational nightmares. And Darwin, being Darwin, tries to help them. He tries to break them out of their cycle. And he can't, because the cycle is their reality. It's not a prison to them. It's just the way things are. And Gumball has to pull Darwin away, has to drag him back to their own show. And there's this beat, just a moment, where Darwin looks back at the DHMIS characters, and you can see on his face that he understands something terrible, that he can't save everyone, that some people are trapped in systems that are invisible to them, and that trying to rescue them might be more about your own need to help than about their actual well-being. That's a philosophical insight about the limits of empathy, about the arrogance that sometimes hides inside compassion. And the show delivers it through a fish looking at a puppet in 11 minutes, without a single line of dialogue explaining what it means. I don't know how this show does what it does. I've been analyzing it for months, and I still feel like I'm only scratching the surface. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the meaning of Gumball is that meaning is never final. That understanding is a process, not a destination. That you keep watching, keep thinking, keep noticing, and the show keeps giving you more. Not because it's infinitely deep, but because it meets you wherever you are. It gives you the joke if you want the joke. It gives you the philosophy if you want the philosophy. It gives you both at the same time if you can handle it. And the show pushes this even further with Penny Fitzgerald, because Penny's arc, cracking her shell in The Shell, Season 3, Episode 20, and revealing the shapeshifter underneath, is a story about authenticity that I think is more philosophically interesting than it gets credit for. Before she cracks her shell, Penny is a specific thing, a peanut with antlers, contained, defined, limited. After the shell breaks, she's anything. She can be a dragon, a wolf, a fairy, a blob of pure emotion. She's undefined. And the question the show asks is she more real without the shell or with it? Is identity about the container or the contents? And Gumball's answer, the famous moment where he sees all of Penny's forms and says she's beautiful, is the show's thesis statement about identity in miniature. You are not your surface. You are not your design. You are the thing underneath that doesn't have a fixed form. That's what's real. And I want to stay with Penny for a moment, because I think her arc is philosophically richer than people give it credit for. Before the shell breaks, Penny's identity is given to her. She's a peanut. That's what she looks like. That's how people perceive her. That's the box she exists in. And she's beautiful in that box. Everyone in the show treats her as the prettiest girl in school, but she's also trapped, because the shell isn't just a physical object, it's a social expectation. It's what everyone wants her to be. Her family keeps her in the shell because they think it protects her, and maybe it does, but it also prevents her from being herself. When Gumball cracks the shell open, accidentally I should say, because this isn't a heroic rescue, it's a clumsy mistake that happens to change everything. What comes out is pure potential. Penny can be anything: a fairy, a wolf, a dragon, a formless blob of emotion. She has no fixed shape, no fixed identity. She is, philosophically speaking, pure becoming. She hasn't arrived anywhere. She's just free. And the show does something really interesting with this, because Penny's freedom is terrifying. Not to her, Penny seems to enjoy her new shape-shifting existence, but to everyone around her. Her father wants her to put the shell back on. The other characters don't know how to react to someone who looks different every time they see her. And Gumball, the one person who accepts all her forms, has to fight for that acceptance, has to stand in front of a crowd and declare that every version of Penny is beautiful, that the shape doesn't matter, that the person inside is what counts. And that's not just a sweet romantic moment, although it is that too. It's a philosophical declaration about the nature of identity. It's Gumball saying, "You are not any single form you take. You are the continuity that flows through all your forms. You are the thread that connects the fairy to the wolf, to the dragon, to the blob. That's you. That's real. Everything else is just a shell." I think about this in relation to Gumball's own identity crisis in the name, because there's a parallel. Penny is trapped in a shell that others put on her. Gumball is trapped in a name that others gave him. Both of them have to break free from an identity that was assigned rather than chosen. And both of them find that the real self, the self underneath the shell, the self behind the name, is more complex, more fluid, and more frightening than the assigned identity ever was. And you know what connects both of these stories? The idea that true identity is not fixed. It's not a thing you have. It's a thing you do. It's a process of becoming, not a state of being. Gumball becomes Gumball by killing Zack. Penny becomes Penny by breaking her shell. Both of them had to destroy a previous version of themselves to access who they really are. And who they really are is someone who doesn't have a permanent form, someone who keeps changing, someone who is always in the process of arriving and never quite there. That's existentialism, by the way. Sartre's whole thing about existence preceding essence. You exist first, and then you define yourself through your choices. Your essence, who you are, isn't predetermined. It's something you create through action. And Gumball and Penny both embody this principle perfectly. And the show doesn't pretend this is easy. Penny's father is furious. Gumball nearly ceases to exist when Zack fights back. The process of becoming yourself in Gumball is violent. It's risky. It might not work. But the show argues, through these characters, through their stories, that the risk is worth it, that a dangerous freedom is better than a comfortable cage. I want to touch on one more character before I move on, because she represents a philosophical perspective that none of the others share. Banana Barbara. Barbara paints the future. She can see what's going to happen before it happens. And the show treats this ability not as a superpower, but as a curse, because Barbara can see the future, but she can't change it. She paints what will be, not what could be. Her art is prediction, not imagination. And the characters, when they discover her paintings, spend their episodes trying desperately to prevent the futures she's depicted, and failing. The paintings always come true. The Oracle, Season 3, Episode 31, deals with this directly. Gumball finds one of Barbara's paintings, showing him running naked through the mall. He takes every precaution. He avoids every situation that could lead to the predicted outcome. And of course, his attempts to avoid the prophecy are what cause it to come true. His struggle against fate is itself part of fate's design. This is the Oedipus paradox, the prophecy fulfilled by the attempt to prevent it. And Gumball handles it with humor, obviously. The prophecy is about public nudity, not patricide. But the philosophical implication is the same. If the future is knowable, then it's fixed. And if it's fixed, then free will is an illusion. Your choices don't determine your future. They're just the mechanism through which the predetermined future arrives. And here's what I find brilliant about how Gumball handles this. The show doesn't resolve the free will question. It doesn't say the future is fixed or free will is real. It just shows you both possibilities simultaneously. Gumball makes choices. Those choices matter. But the end point is always the one Barbara painted. The destination is fixed. Only the route is free. I actually have a theory about Banana Barbara that I've never seen anyone else bring up. I think Barbara can paint the future because she's the closest thing Elmore has to the audience. Not in the meta-narrative sense, that's Rob, but in the temporal sense. She can see what's coming because she exists slightly outside the normal flow of the show's time. She's watching from ahead, the way we watch reruns. She's already seen this episode, and her paintings are her attempt to communicate that knowledge to characters who are still living through the story for the first time. If that reading is right, then Barbara's tragedy isn't just that she can see the future. It's that she can see the future because she's already past it. She's post-narrative. She's in the place where episodes are reruns, where stories are already finished, where the only thing left is to document what happened. And that's a kind of consciousness that is fundamentally different from everyone else's in Elmore. Everyone else is living the story. Barbara is remembering it. Okay, I know I said I was going to start closing things out several paragraphs ago, and I keep not doing it. And that's because this show keeps giving me more to talk about. Every time I think I've found the bottom, there's another layer. And I think that's genuinely remarkable. This is a show that premiered on May 3rd, 2011. created by Ben Bocquelet, who took a bunch of rejected character designs from commercial work and put them all in the same school and said, what if they were friends? That's the premise. That's all it was supposed to be. And somehow, over the course of 6 seasons and a revival, it became one of the most philosophically ambitious shows in the history of animation. Not because anyone said, let's make a philosophy show, but because the format demanded it. Because when you create a world where a 2D cat, a puppet dinosaur, and a photograph of a cloud all have to coexist, the questions about the nature of reality write themselves. When you create characters who are aware of their own medium, the questions about consciousness and freedom are inevitable. Gumball didn't become philosophical because someone wanted it to be. It became philosophical because that's what happens when you take a cartoon's conventions seriously. And I think there's a lesson in that, not just for animators or storytellers, but for all of us. Because we all live inside conventions. We all operate within systems that we've never examined. We all follow rules that we've never questioned. And Gumball says, question them, not necessarily to break them. Rob tried that, and look where it got him. But to understand them, to see the architecture of your own existence, to notice the walls around you, and wonder who built them and why. Because once you start noticing, you can't stop. Once you see the seams in the fabric of your world, you see them everywhere. And that's terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. It's terrifying because it means your reality is contingent, constructed, fragile. It's exhilarating because it means your reality is contingent, constructed, and therefore changeable. Not infinitely changeable. The void still exists. The reset button still works. The show must go on, but changeable within limits. Changeable enough to matter. I think that's the most empowering thing Gumball teaches. Not that you can change the world, not that you can escape the system, but that you can understand the system well enough to make choices within it. Real choices. Informed choices. Choices that acknowledge the constraints without surrendering to them. And that, friends, is philosophy. Not the textbook kind. The lived kind. The kind you do at 3 in the morning while a cartoon plays in the background. I want to take a slightly different approach now and talk about something that I think connects all of these philosophical threads. And that's the show's relationship with absurdity. Because Gumball is, at its core, an absurdist show. And I mean that in the strict philosophical sense. Not just in the sense that weird things happen. Albert Camus, and look, I know I'm the guy on YouTube talking about French existentialist philosophy in a Gumball video, and I know how that sounds. But bear with me. Camus defined absurdity as the conflict between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence on the subject. We want answers. The universe gives us nothing. And the absurd hero, in Camus' formulation, is the person who keeps living despite the silence, who finds joy not despite the meaninglessness, but within it. Gumball Watterson is the absurd hero. He lives in a world that doesn't make sense. A world where cartoon physics override natural law, where a banana can be your classmate, where your neighbor is a puppet, where the sky is sometimes made of construction paper, and sometimes a real photograph. And Gumball's response to this absurdity is not despair. It's not even confusion. Most of the time, it's engagement. He throws himself into every situation, every relationship, every conflict, with his whole being. He feels things intensely. He acts impulsively. He messes up constantly, and then he does it again. And the show rewards this. Not consistently, Gumball's impulsiveness causes as many problems as it solves. But philosophically, the show clearly believes that engagement with the absurd is better than withdrawal from it. The characters who withdraw, Rob, who can't accept the rules of the world, Zach, who tried to impose a different identity on top of the absurdity, are the ones who suffer most. The characters who engage, Gumball, Darwin, even Nicole in her own constrained way, are the ones who find something like meaning. And I want to be really specific about what I mean by meaning here, because I think the show is very precise about this, even though it never uses the word. Meaning, in Gumball, is not purpose. It's not a grand plan. It's not destiny or calling or cosmic significance. Meaning, in Gumball, is connection. It's the moment when two characters look at each other and something real passes between them. It's Darwin walking across Elmore on his newly grown legs because he can't bear to be separated from his brother. It's Nicole choosing Richard over an easier life because the messy, chaotic, difficult love they share is worth more than comfort. It's Gumball looking at every version of Penny and seeing the same person underneath, Connection is the only thing in Elmore that the reset button doesn't erase. Episodes reset, damage heals, buildings rebuild, but the relationships persist, the love persists. And in a world where everything else is provisional, temporary, constructed, where the sky can crack and reality can degrade, and the void can swallow you whole, the fact that connection survives is the show's most powerful philosophical statement. It's saying that love is more structurally sound than physics, that caring about someone is more real than the ground you're standing on. I know that sounds sentimental, and maybe it is, but I think it's also true. And I think Gumball earns the right to say it by showing you, again and again, all the ways the world can break, and then showing you the one thing that doesn't. And this brings me to one of the most philosophical episodes in the show's entire run, and it's one that I almost never see discussed in these terms. The downer is usually the one people point to when they talk about Gumball tackling heavy themes. But for my money, the most philosophically rich episode is The Money. Here's why. The Money takes the basic structure of Gumball's existence, a cartoon funded by a network, starring characters who exist only as long as someone pays for them, and turns it into the actual plot. When the Wattersons lose their money, the show loses its animation. The more broke they get, the cruder the art becomes. By the end, they're stick figures on post-it notes, and the only way to restore reality is to do a commercial, to sell out, to acknowledge that their existence is commercial, that they are products, and to embrace that rather than resist it. And Gumball, who spent the whole episode refusing to sell out, who insisted that the family's integrity was more important than money, finally sees how much the commercial pays and immediately agrees. And reality is restored, color returns, the animation becomes lush again. The world is saved by capitalism. Now, is the show being cynical here? I don't think so. I think it's being honest, because the show knows what it is. It's a commercial product. It exists because Cartoon Network makes money from it. And rather than pretending otherwise, rather than maintaining the illusion that art exists in some pure space untouched by commerce, Gumball stares directly at the machine that produces it and says, yeah, this is how it works. We exist because someone pays for us. And the alternative, refusing to participate in the system, is dissolution, non-existence. Stick figures on sticky notes. That's not cynicism. That's realism about the conditions of creative existence. And I think it's actually a more radical statement than any amount of anti-capitalist posturing, because it comes from inside the system. The show isn't critiquing capitalism from a safe distance. It's showing you what happens to things that capitalism stops supporting. They vanish. And yeah, I know some people might push back on me reading this much into a season 3 finale of a Cartoon Network show. And look, maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there. Maybe The Money is just a funny episode about the Wattersons being broke. But I don't think so, because Gumball has earned the benefit of the doubt. This is a show that consistently, deliberately, and with full awareness of what it's doing, uses the structures and conventions of animation to ask philosophical questions. It uses the medium as the message. The form is the content. And that, more than anything else, is what makes Gumball philosophically special. It doesn't just talk about these ideas, it embodies them. The mixed media animation, the fact that every character is made of a different material, animated in a different style, existing in a different artistic tradition, isn't just an aesthetic choice. It's a philosophical statement about the nature of reality. And speaking of the relationship between safety and freedom, I need to talk about The Safety, Season 3, Episode 32. Because this episode is Gumball's most direct engagement with political philosophy, and it's one that feels more relevant every year. After watching a deeply unsettling safety video in class, and honestly, that safety video is a work of art in itself, animated by Jeremy Perrin in this intentionally creepy retro style that looks like those old British public information films from the 70s. Darwin becomes obsessed with safety. He starts protecting Gumball from every possible danger. Then he starts protecting the family, then the school, then the town. And by the end of the episode, Darwin has turned Elmore into a surveillance state. I mean that literally. Darwin installs cameras everywhere. He censors speech. There's this brilliant running gag where Gumball discovers that Darwin has put a child filter on reality itself. So any dangerous or inappropriate content is literally censored. Fight scenes get replaced with cards that say edited. Sound effects get swapped for harmless words like twiddle. Even the cartoon Gumball is watching gets shut down because the violence in it might be dangerous. And the residents of Elmore go along with it, willingly. The students line up and chant, "It is for our own good." They salute Gumball and Darwin as the Lords of Elmore and then slap themselves. And when the Wattersons ask why nobody resisted Darwin's takeover, the answer is devastatingly simple. Because he's cute. Because he was nice about it. Because he genuinely believed he was protecting them. And here's the thing. He was protecting them. That's what makes this episode philosophically devastating. Darwin's surveillance state actually does make Elmore safer. People aren't getting hurt anymore. The dangerous cartoon physics that define their world are being contained. The censorship filter prevents violence. The cameras prevent crime. By every measurable metric, Darwin's authoritarian regime is working. The only thing it destroys is freedom. And the show asks, is that a fair trade? I think about this episode in relation to The Vision, Alan's world domination episode, and the parallels are striking. Both Darwin and Alan arrive at authoritarianism through genuine concern for others. Darwin wants everyone to be safe. Alan wants everyone to be happy. And both of them conclude that the only way to achieve their goal is to remove people's ability to choose otherwise. Safety through surveillance, happiness through re-education, protection through control. And this is a real philosophical problem. It's not a kids' show simplification. This is the genuine tension at the heart of political philosophy. How do you balance safety and freedom? How much freedom are you willing to sacrifice for protection? And who decides where the line is? The show's answer, characteristically, is messy. The Wattersons overthrow Darwin's regime. Freedom is restored. But the episode doesn't pretend that freedom is safe. The very first thing that happens after Darwin's cameras come down is that the old cartoon violence resumes. People start getting hurt again. The world becomes dangerous again. And the episode ends not with a celebration of freedom, but with an acknowledgement that freedom has costs. That a free world is a dangerous world. And that's just how it is. I rewatched this episode last week, and I kept pausing it to think. Because it was made in 2015, and the questions it asks about surveillance and safety and the seductive logic of authoritarianism feel more urgent now than they did then. This kids' show predicted the fundamental debate of the 2020s. How much freedom should we surrender for security? And it didn't answer the question. It just made sure you felt both sides of it in your gut. And that connects to something I want to explore about Darwin more broadly, because Darwin is the character who most directly embodies the philosophical tension between empathy and autonomy. He feels everything. He cares about everyone. And repeatedly throughout the series, his empathy leads him to totalitarianism. Not because he's evil, because he's not. Darwin might be the least evil character on the show, but because unrestrained empathy, taken to its logical extreme, becomes control. If you care about people's suffering enough, you eventually start wanting to prevent all suffering. And the only way to prevent all suffering is to control all behavior. And the only way to control all behavior is to remove all choice. And now you've built a prison out of love. And the people inside can't even complain, because the person who put them there did it for the purest possible reasons. That is an insight about the nature of compassion that I did not expect to find in a cartoon about a fish with legs. And I found it, and I can't stop thinking about it. Look, I realize I keep saying, I can't stop thinking about this. And I know that probably sounds repetitive, but the honest truth is that this show keeps doing this to me. I go in expecting to analyze a funny episode about a blue cat, and I come out wrestling with genuine philosophical problems that I don't have answers to. And I think that's the highest compliment I can pay to any work of art. It makes me think, not about itself, but about the world, about my world, about the assumptions I carry around without examining them. Let me give you another example of how the show handles philosophical complexity with a light touch. I already mentioned the finale as a deconstruction of the reset button, but there's an earlier episode that does something related, and in some ways, even more unsettling. The Job, Season 2, Episode 11. In The Job, Richard gets a job as a pizza delivery man, and reality starts to break. The sky fractures. The laws of physics stop working. People's faces melt. The world literally cannot handle the concept of Richard Watterson having gainful employment. And I've mentioned this in passing, but I want to really sit with it for a moment. Because what this episode is saying philosophically is genuinely wild. It's saying that Richard's incompetent tense isn't a character flaw. It's a structural requirement. The universe needs Richard to be useless. His laziness is load-bearing. If he becomes productive, the foundations of reality crack. And I think this is Gumball's most extreme statement about the relationship between individual identity and systemic stability. Richard can't change because the system can't survive his change. He's not just lazy by choice or by nature. He's lazy because the world was designed to accommodate his laziness. And removing that variable from the equation causes a cascade failure. Think about what that means for the concept of self-improvement. We live in a culture that constantly tells us to be better, to optimize, to hustle, to achieve. And Gumball looks at that imperative and says, what if you can't? Not because you're weak or undisciplined, but because the world you live in literally requires you to stay the way you are. What if the system that contains you has allocated a specific role for you, and your attempts to escape that role don't just harm you, they harm everyone? That's determinism, but it's a specific kind of determinism. It's not fate or predestination in the cosmic sense. It's structural determinism. The idea that the systems we live in, social, economic, narrative, have assigned us roles, and deviating from those roles has consequences that extend far beyond ourselves. Richard can't have a job because the show can't handle Richard having a job. The narrative structure itself is the authority that keeps him in his place. And honestly, I think this is one of the most perceptive things the show does, because we like to think we're free. We like to think we can become anything. But so much of what we are is determined by the systems we inhabit, our families, our economies, our cultures, our social positions. And Gumball makes that invisible constraint visible by literalizing it, by having the sky crack when Richard delivers pizza. I'm going to take a slight tangent here, and I apologize in advance, but I think it's relevant. I've been rewatching the entire series from the beginning while putting this video together, and one of the things that strikes me most is how the show's philosophical ambitions grow across seasons. Season 1 is mostly a conventional cartoon, a really good, really funny, visually inventive cartoon, but one that's primarily interested in comedy and character. The philosophical undercurrent is there, but it's quiet. Season 2 starts pushing buttons. The finale deconstructs the reset. The Job literalizes systemic determinism. The seeds are planted. Season 3 is where everything explodes. The void, the question, the countdown, the downer, the safety, the saint, the name, the shell, the kids, the money. I mean, look at that list. That's one season. One season that tackles existentialism, nihilism, identity, surveillance, depression, the meaning of life, the nature of time, the limits of goodness, the relationship between names and selves, the relationship between art and commerce, in 11-minute episodes, interspersed with jokes about butts and banana peels. Season 3 is when I fell in love with this show, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think Season 3 is when the show fell in love with what it could be, when it realized that the mixed media format and the meta-aware sensibility and the cartoon logic weren't just aesthetic tools. They were philosophical tools. They were ways of asking questions that no other format could ask. And Seasons 4, 5, and 6 keep building on that foundation. The Disaster and The Rerun are philosophical masterpieces. The Vision is a horror movie about niceness. The Loophole is a treatise on the impossibility of codifying morality. The Puppets is a meditation on the limits of empathy. The Console is an essay about determinism disguised as a Final Fantasy parody. The Inquisition is about the death of art. I keep a list of shows I consider philosophically significant. You know, the ones that actually make me think, not just the ones that reference Nietzsche in their dialogue. And Gumball is on that list, right alongside shows that are supposed to be philosophical. Your Westworlds, your Black Mirrors, your Evangelions. And I put it there without apology, because this show earns its place on that list. It earns it by doing something those shows can't do, by being funny about it, by refusing to take its own profundity seriously, by asking the deepest possible questions, and then immediately cutting to a joke about someone getting hit in the face with a dodgeball. And I think that's actually what makes it more philosophically honest than most prestige television, because in real life, profundity and absurdity coexist. You can have an existential crisis while eating cereal. You can confront the meaninglessness of existence while your neighbor's puppet man is singing opera badly through the wall. Gumball captures that coexistence in a way that no other show I've watched can match. Okay, I want to talk about one more philosophical thread before I start closing this out, because I think it's the one that most directly addresses the experience of watching this show late at night. And it's about consciousness. Because Gumball is, underneath everything, a show about consciousness, about what it means to be aware, about the difference between existing and knowing that you exist. Most of the characters in Elmore exist without questioning their existence. They go about their lives. They have adventures. They reset. They do it again. They're like most people in most societies throughout most of human history. They live within the framework they were given without asking where the framework came from. But some characters start to question. Rob questions. Gumball, in certain episodes, questions. Banana Barbara seems to have awareness that operates on a completely different plane. Her paintings predict the future, which means she can perceive a temporal dimension that other characters can't. And the show treats these moments of heightened awareness with a mixture of wonder and dread. Because consciousness, in Gumball, is double-edged. It's the thing that makes you real. We established that. Your feelings are real because you experience them, but it's also the thing that makes you vulnerable. The more aware you are, the more you can be hurt. Rob's awareness of his fictionality doesn't free him, it torments him. Gumball's occasional brushes with the fourth wall don't enlighten him, they terrify him. The truth about Elmore, that it's a show, that they're characters, that their world has an author and an audience, is presented by the show as a truth that is too dangerous to fully comprehend. And I think about this in relation to human consciousness all the time. Because isn't that our situation too? We're aware that we exist. We're aware that our world has structures we didn't design, rules we didn't choose, constraints we can't escape. We're aware that our lives are finite, that our memories are imperfect, that our sense of self is contingent on things we don't control. And that awareness is simultaneously the most precious thing about us and the most painful. Gumball doesn't resolve this tension. It just depicts it over and over in different ways, through different characters, in different episodes. It shows us what it looks like to be conscious in a world that wasn't designed for conscious beings. And it shows us that the answer, if there is one, isn't to eliminate consciousness or to ignore it. The answer is to use it, to feel things fully, to notice the beauty and the absurdity and the sadness and the humor of existing. To be present, to be here, to be on a bench with Sussy, throwing mayo at pigeons, understanding everything and nothing at the same time. Think about it. In Elmore, a 2D hand-drawn cat walks through a photographic real-world street and has a conversation with a 3D CGI cactus and a puppet man. Every character exists in a different medium. They're made of different stuff. They perceive the world differently, are animated by different techniques, and yet they all share the same space. They all interact, they all affect each other, and nobody in Elmore finds this strange. Nobody looks at Banana Joe, who is a literal banana, animated in a different style from everyone around him, and says, "Wait, why do you look like that?" The diversity of artistic styles is treated as normal, as unremarkable, as just the way the world is. And I think that's one of the most quietly powerful statements the show makes. It says, reality doesn't have to be consistent to be real. Things don't have to be made of the same stuff to belong in the same world. Different modes of existence, different ways of being, can coexist, can communicate, can love each other. The medium doesn't matter, the connection does. I've been making videos about this show for a while now, and I keep discovering new layers. And I want to be honest with you, I don't think I'll ever reach the bottom. I don't think there is a bottom. Gumball is one of those rare works of art that is genuinely inexhaustible. Not because it's infinitely complex, but because it keeps asking the same questions in new ways. And every time you think you've found the answer, the show gives you a reason to doubt it. That's what good philosophy does. It doesn't give you answers. It gives you better questions. Let me talk about something a bit different now. Something that connects to the philosophy, but from a different angle. I want to talk about the show's relationship with narrative itself, with storytelling as a philosophical concept. Because Gumball is, among other things, a story about stories, about what stories do to the people trapped inside them, about the violence of narrative structure. I keep thinking about The Test, Season 5, Episode 8. This is the episode where Tobias becomes the main character of the show. Not metaphorically, literally. The camera starts following Tobias instead of Gumball. The tone shifts. The jokes change to match Tobias's personality. And Gumball, still aware that something is wrong, watches from the sidelines as his own show transforms into something unrecognizable. And the reason this happens is genuinely disturbing. An online quiz, one of those "what character are you" things, tells Gumball that he's the sidekick, not the hero. And the universe responds to that assessment by actually restructuring itself around Tobias. Because in Gumball's world, narrative roles aren't just labels, they're architecture. They determine what happens to you, how the camera treats you, how much reality you're allowed to occupy. When Gumball confronts Tobias, the show even changes animation style. The visual language warps to accommodate the new protagonist, and Gumball has to physically fight his way back to the center of the narrative. He has to reclaim his role, because if he doesn't, he'll become what Rob became, a background character, a nobody, something the void can swallow. And here's what I've never seen anyone say about this episode, and I think it's important. The test isn't just about protagonist privilege. It's about something much darker. It's about the way narrative creates hierarchies of importance. In any story, some characters matter more than others. Some characters get arcs, and others get cut. Some characters are real, and others are extras. And in Gumball's world, where the narrative structure is the literal structure of reality, that hierarchy isn't abstract, it's physical. Being important means existing fully. Being unimportant means fading. And honestly, the visual transition in this episode is one of the most impressive things the show ever does. When the narrative center shifts from Gumball to Tobias, the entire aesthetic changes. The color palette warms. The music gets different. The shot compositions shift. Even the pacing feels different. It feels like you're suddenly watching a mediocre teen comedy instead of Gumball. And Gumball, pushed to the margins of his own show, starts to literally fade. His colors desaturate. His body starts becoming transparent. He's losing narrative significance. And in this world, that means losing reality. And the thing that haunts me about this is how perfectly it mirrors a feeling that I think a lot of people have in real life. The feeling of being pushed to the margins of your own story. The feeling of watching someone else become the center of attention, the center of the narrative, while you fade into the background. It's jealousy, sure, but it's also something deeper than jealousy. It's an existential fear. The fear that you might not be the protagonist, that your life might not be the story you think it is, that you might be someone else's background character. And Gumball takes that fear, that very real, very human fear, and turns it into a literal plot. The fear becomes the reality, and the only way to fight it is to reclaim your own narrative, to insist that your story matters, to fight your way back to the center of the frame. I think there's a whole essay to be written about the test and imposter syndrome, about the way so many of us walk around convinced that we're secretly the sidekick, that someone else deserves our spot, that the online quiz of life would tell us we're not the hero of our own story. And Gumball's response to that fear, no, this is my show, is both selfish and necessary. Because if you don't insist on your own significance, who will? And look, the show complicates this too, because Gumball's insistence on being the protagonist is, from Rob's perspective, an act of violence. Gumball's narrative centrality comes at the expense of everyone else's. His importance is their marginalization. The protagonist's light casts the longest shadow. I think about Tobias a lot in relation to this, because Tobias is one of the show's most interesting minor characters, philosophically speaking, and nobody ever talks about him in those terms. Tobias is the character who wants to be important, who tries to be cool, who performs confidence and popularity and relevance. And the show consistently, ruthlessly, reveals that his performance is hollow, that he's not cool, that he's trying too hard, that the identity he's projecting is a costume, not a self. And in the test, when Tobias briefly becomes the protagonist, the show reveals something uncomfortable. Tobias's version of the show is bad. Not morally bad, aesthetically bad. The jokes are worse. The writing is worse. The character dynamics don't work as well. The show itself degrades when Tobias is at its center. And I know that sounds like the show is just dunking on Tobias. And on one level it is. But on another level, it's asking, does everyone deserve to be the protagonist of a story? Is every perspective equally interesting? Is every life equally narratively compelling? And the show's honest answer seems to be, no. Some stories are better than others. Some centers hold better than others. Some protagonists make better shows. And that's a deeply uncomfortable philosophical position, because it implies a hierarchy of significance that most of us would reject in real life. We want to believe that everyone's story matters equally, that every life is a valid center. But Gumball, with its usual unflinching honesty, suggests that narrative significance isn't democratic. Some characters just are more interesting. And pretending otherwise, pretending that Tobias is as compelling as Gumball, that any character could fill the protagonist role equally well, is a lie. A well-intentioned lie, but a lie. I'm not sure I agree with the show on this. I'm not sure I disagree either. But the fact that a kid's cartoon is making me genuinely grapple with the question of whether all perspectives are equally valuable, not morally, but narratively, is something I find extraordinary. This is why the show's treatment of background characters is so philosophically charged. Every background character in Gumball is a person with a life. The show occasionally zooms in on them, the extras, the boredom, and reveals that they have their own stories, their own dramas, their own philosophical questions. They're not less real than Gumball. They just get less screen time, less narrative attention. And in a world where narrative attention equals existential security, that's a life or death difference. And this connects to something that I think is the deepest philosophical vein in the entire show. It's the question of whether being observed is the same as being real. Gumball exists when we watch. When we turn off the TV, does Elmore continue? Do the characters live their lives between episodes? Or do they wink out of existence, like a screen going dark? The show asks this question in The Money, when the animation degrades without funding. It asks it in The Signal, Season 4, Episode 24, when the show itself starts glitching, like a broadcast signal losing coherence. It asks it through Rob, who exists because the show needs a villain, and would cease to exist if it didn't. And it asks it in The Inquisition, the original Season 6 finale, when Superintendent Evil, the superintendent of schools turned cosmic threat, begins converting Elmore's characters into normal people, into realistic humans, into something that could exist outside the cartoon. And the horror of the Inquisition isn't that the characters are being destroyed, it's that they're being normalized. Their unique art styles, the thing that makes them them, are being stripped away and replaced with something generic. Something that fits into a different kind of story. And the implication is that this is what cancellation looks like from the inside. This is what it feels like when a show ends. The characters don't die. They become something else. Something that can exist in whatever comes next. Something that has lost the specific, weird, beautiful thing that made them who they were. I think about The Inquisition a lot because it aired as the show's finale before the revival was announced. And for a while, that's how Gumball ended. Not with a resolution, but with a threat. With the characters staring at the end of their world and not being able to stop it. With the screen going to static. And I think that ending, that terrifying, unresolved ending, is the most honest thing a cartoon has ever done. Because it refuses to give you the comfort of closure. It says, this story doesn't end neatly. This story might not end at all. It might just stop. And the characters will be frozen in that last moment forever, staring at the static, waiting for someone to turn the TV back on. Okay, I want to bring it back around now. Back to the center. Back to Sussy throwing mayonnaise at pigeons and saying the meaning of life is finding your own way to enjoy it. Because here's what I think the amazing world of Gumball is, philosophically. It's a show about being trapped in a system you didn't design, surrounded by rules you didn't choose, playing a role you didn't ask for, and finding joy anyway. It's about the act of living inside absurdity without surrendering to it or pretending it doesn't exist. It's about the insistence that your feelings are real, even when your world isn't. And it does this while being one of the funniest shows ever made. It does this while having a cactus hug a balloon in a romantic relationship that's simultaneously adorable and physically impossible. It does this while having a 12-year-old blue cat scream, "What the what?" at a universe that keeps breaking its own rules. I think about the way this show uses its mixed media animation as philosophical argument. A 2D character standing in a 3D world, talking to a live-action puppet. These characters shouldn't be able to coexist. They're made of different materials, animated by different techniques, operating in different visual languages. And yet they love each other. They fight with each other. They live in the same houses, and go to the same school, and eat at the same restaurants. And nobody in Elmore finds this strange, because they've accepted the fundamental condition of their existence. That reality doesn't have to make sense to be real. That belonging doesn't require sameness. That you can be a 2D drawing, talking to a photograph, and it's still a conversation. It's still connection. It's still life. I've been thinking about what to call Gumball's philosophical position. It's not exactly existentialism, because existentialism tends to be heavy and serious, and Gumball is anything but. It's not exactly absurdism, because absurdism in the Camus sense involves a confrontation with meaninglessness that Gumball tends to skip past. It's something else, something warmer, something that acknowledges the absurdity and the meaninglessness and the constructed nature of everything and then says, "Yeah, but did you see the thing Darwin did with the milk carton? That was hilarious." I think the closest I can get is this. Gumball's philosophy is radical acceptance with a sense of humor. It's the idea that the appropriate response to an irrational universe is not despair, not denial, but laughter. Genuine, warm, inclusive laughter that brings people together rather than pushing them apart. And maybe that's why Sussy is the one who gets to deliver the meaning of life speech. Because Sussy has no pretensions, no agenda, no role to play. She's just a human chin with googly eyes, throwing mayo at pigeons, being exactly what she is. And what she is free. Free from narrative constraint, free from character archetype, free from the need to be anything other than herself. In a show where every character is imprisoned by their design, where the protagonist must be the protagonist, where the villain must be the villain, where the balloon must be positive, and the cat must be impulsive, and the fish must be kind, Sussy is the only one who just exists. And she's the one who knows the answer. Life is about the journey, finding your own way to enjoy it, making friends along the way. It's not a complicated answer. It's not a sophisticated answer, but it's an answer that comes from a place of genuine freedom. And in a show about characters who are trapped inside a cartoon that knows it's a cartoon, spoken by the one character who exists outside all the rules, it carries a weight that no philosophical treatise ever could. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about a cartoon. This is a video about what it means to be alive inside something you don't understand. About how to find purpose in a world that doesn't owe you one. About the quiet heroism of showing up every day and being yourself, even when, especially when, you're not sure what that means. I started making this video because I thought it'd be interesting to talk about the deeper themes in Gumball. I didn't expect to find a philosophy that I actually believe in. A philosophy that says, the world is absurd, and you are made of contradictions, and reality is conditional, and none of that matters as much as the fact that you are here, right now, experiencing this. And I realize I haven't talked about something that I think is crucial to understanding Gumball's philosophy. And it's something that connects to every philosophical thread we've followed tonight. It's the show's treatment of morality. Because Gumball has a really weird relationship with morality, it's not an amoral show. It clearly has values. It clearly cares about its characters. It clearly thinks some things are better than others. But it's not a moralistic show either. It doesn't preach. It doesn't offer tidy lessons. When it does seem to offer a moral at the end of an episode, it often immediately undercuts it with a joke that suggests the moral might not be the whole picture. And I think that's philosophically deliberate. Take The Saint again, Season 3, Episode 29. The episode where Gumball tries to break Alan's goodness. Now, the surface level moral of this episode is clear. Don't be jealous of people who are better than you. Learn from them. Aspire to be more positive. That's what Gumball seems to learn at the end. He apologizes to Alan. He acknowledges that Alan is a better person than him. Story over. But the show gives that moral a shelf life of exactly 17 episodes. Because in The Vision, we learn that Alan's goodness is a strategy, that beneath the saintly surface is a would-be dictator. And suddenly the moral of the saint, aspire to be like Alan, looks dangerous. Because Alan isn't good. Alan is performing goodness as a means to power. And Gumball's instinct, his paranoid, jealous, destructive instinct that Alan must be hiding something, was right all along. So what's the actual moral? Is it be suspicious of people who seem too good to be true? Is it goodness is always a mask? No, I don't think the show believes that either. I think the show is saying something much more nuanced. Morality is complicated. People are complicated. The same person can be genuinely kind and secretly authoritarian. The same impulse can be noble and selfish at the same time. And any philosophy that tries to sort people into simple categories, good and bad, saint and villain, hero and background character, is going to miss the truth. And Gumball himself embodies this complexity. He's not a good character. Not consistently. He's selfish, lazy, impulsive, occasionally cruel. In The Saint, he genuinely torments another person for his own amusement, but he's also capable of real love, real sacrifice, real insight. He broke Penny out of her shell. He fought to save his family in The Disaster. He accepts people for who they are with a consistency that borders on radical. He is, in the philosophical sense, a complete person, meaning a person who contains contradictions and doesn't try to resolve them. And I think the show's philosophical stance on morality is basically this: be a complete person. Don't try to be a saint, because sainthood is either impossible or tyrannical. Don't try to be consistently anything, because consistency in an inconsistent world is either dishonest or insane. Just be. Feel things. Make mistakes. Apologize when you should. Don't apologize when you shouldn't. And above all, don't let anyone else's philosophical framework tell you who you're supposed to be. That's Sussy's lesson again. Find your own way to enjoy it. The moral isn't external. It's internal. It's yours. Nobody else gets to define it for you. And you know what? This connects to something the show does with its visual design that I think is genius, and that I haven't seen anyone else point out in quite this way. Every character in Gumball is designed in a different art style. Not just animated differently, designed differently. They come from different artistic traditions, different media, different visual languages. And the show never explains this, never justifies it. The characters just look the way they look. But philosophically, what this means is that every character in Gumball exists in a different ontological category. They're not just different species or different personalities. They're made of different stuff. They're animated by different techniques. They perceive reality through different visual frameworks, and yet they all live in the same town, go to the same school, interact as equals. Banana Joe is a piece of fruit, not a cartoon character who looks like a piece of fruit. An actual banana, animated in Flash, standing next to Gumball, who's hand-drawn 2D, who's standing in front of a photograph of a real building, and a puppet walks past them, and a stop-motion clay figure sits in the desk behind them, and the chalk drawing on the blackboard might be sentient. This is not just an aesthetic choice. This is a philosophical statement about pluralism, about the idea that different kinds of being can coexist, that you don't have to share the same ontological status, the same way of existing, to share the same space, the same world, the same story. And I find that incredibly moving, because it's a vision of a world that doesn't demand conformity, that doesn't require everyone to be the same kind of thing in order to belong. Elmore is a world where a 2D cat and a 3D cactus and a photograph cloud and a puppet dinosaur all go to school together, and the show treats this as completely normal, not utopian, not aspirational, just normal. This is how things are. Different kinds of beings, living together, dealing with the same problems, loving the same people. And if that's not a philosophy worth celebrating, I don't know what is. Let me talk about one more thing before I bring this home, because there's an episode from the revival, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, that I think is the ultimate expression of everything we've been discussing, and it's the rewrite. Now, I know the revival is still relatively new, and I know opinions are divided on it, and I want to be careful about spoilers. But I think the rewrite is important enough to discuss because it's where the show's philosophy reaches its logical conclusion. In the rewrite, Gumball and Darwin confront the fundamental question of their existence head-on. They start to notice that their world isn't working the way it should. Reality is distorting. The rules are breaking down, and they have to decide. Do they try to fix the world, or do they accept that the world is unfixable? And Rob is there. Rob, who has been through the void and come back. Rob, who knows the truth about Elmore. And in the rewrite, Rob makes a choice that reframes everything we thought we knew about him. He accepts his role. Not his role as the villain, his role as the protector, the one who keeps the show running, the one who makes sure the story continues, even at the cost of his own freedom. And that's devastating, because Rob, the character who spent the entire original series fighting against the system, rebelling against the narrative that trapped him, chooses to become part of the system. Not because he was defeated, not because he gave up, but because he realized that the system, for all its injustice, is the only thing keeping the people he cares about alive. That without the story, there are no characters. Without the constraints, there is no Elmore. Without the prison, there is no home. That is the ultimate expression of Gumball's philosophy. Freedom and constraint are not opposites. They're the same thing, seen from different angles. The story that traps you is also the story that gives you life. The rules that limit you are also the rules that make you possible. And the mature response, the genuinely philosophical response, is not to fight the system or accept it, but to understand that you are the system, that the system is you, that the story and the characters and the rules and the rebellion are all the same thing, all happening at once, all equally real and equally constructed. I've rewatched that ending probably 10 times now, and it still makes my chest tight. because Rob doesn't get a happy ending. He gets a meaningful one. He gets to choose. And his choice is to sacrifice his freedom for the continuation of the story, to become the invisible structure that holds everything together, to be the walls of the room instead of the person standing in it. And I think that's the most philosophical thing Gumball has ever done, because it takes the biggest philosophical question of the entire series. What does it mean to be real in a constructed world? And answers it not with words, but with a choice. A character choosing to be part of the construction. Choosing to be the story rather than the character in the story. Choosing responsibility over freedom. Choosing love over self. And the show doesn't tell you whether that's right. It doesn't tell you whether Rob made the correct choice or a tragic one. It just shows you the choice and lets you feel it. And what you feel, I think, depends on who you are, on what you value, on what philosophy you carry in your bones. That's what this show does. It doesn't give you a philosophy. It gives you the space to discover your own. And it does it while making you laugh, making you think, making you feel, and occasionally making you want to throw mayo at pigeons. Speaking of which, let me circle back one more time to that bench in Elmore Park, to Sussy and her pigeons, to the simplest and most profound thing the show has ever said. I've been thinking about why Sussy is the one who gets to say it, why the show gives the meaning of life to its strangest, most marginal, most undefined character. And I think it's because Sussy is the show's ideal philosopher. Not because she's smart, she's not particularly. Not because she's wise, she's mostly just weird. But because she has no agenda, no role to protect, no identity to maintain, no philosophical framework that she's trying to prove right. Sussy just is. She exists in Elmore without trying to be anything in Elmore. And from that position of pure, unfiltered being, she can see something that the other characters, locked inside their roles and their arcs and their relationships, cannot see. She can see that the question doesn't matter, that the meaning of life isn't a puzzle to solve or a secret to discover. It's a direction to face. It's a way of walking through the world. It's the journey and the friends and the mayo. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, about how the most important insights often come from the least expected places. How the characters we dismiss, the weird ones, the quiet ones, the ones who don't fit, are sometimes the ones who see most clearly, because they're not invested in the system. They have no stake in maintaining the illusion. They can just look and see and say what they see. And maybe that's the biggest philosophical lesson Gumball offers. Pay attention to the Sussies in your life, the people who don't fit. The ones throwing mayo at pigeons while the rest of us are having existential crises, because they might know something we don't. Or maybe they just like mayo, and maybe that's okay too. And maybe you are experiencing this at 3 in the morning with your eyes half closed. And maybe this is just background noise to help you fall asleep. And that's fine. That's perfect actually, because the meaning of life isn't in the grand gestures. It's in the small ones. It's in the mayo thrown at pigeons. It's in the quiet moment between episodes where nothing happens and everything matters. And actually, I want to sit with that for a second, because I think there's something philosophically significant about the fact that you might be falling asleep right now, about the context in which you're consuming this analysis, because this is a fall asleep to video. That's what Cortoon does. We make videos that are meant to accompany sleep, and there's something beautiful about that, philosophically. Because sleep is the closest most of us ever get to non-existence. It's the daily rehearsal for the void. Every night, you close your eyes, and consciousness dissolves, and you stop being you for a while. And then you come back, you reset, you wake up, and the world is still there. And you're still you, or at least you think you are, because you have the same memories, the same body, the same name. But are you the same person? Or did the old you end and a new you begin, with a continuity of memory that creates the illusion of persistence? That's the ship of Theseus again. It's what happens to Gumball every time the episode ends and a new one begins. It's what happens to every character in Elmore when the credits roll. They cease, they resume. And the question of whether they're the same characters after the reset is the same question you face every morning when the alarm goes off. I think about this late at night. I think about the parallels between falling asleep and the space between episodes. The space where the characters don't exist, where Elmore goes dark, where the status quo resets and the damage heals and everyone forgets what happened last time. Is that oblivion or is it rest? Is the reset button a mercy or a curse? I don't know. And I think Gumball doesn't know either. And I think that uncertainty That willingness to live inside the question without demanding an answer is the most philosophically honest position there is. You know, I've been thinking about why I make these videos. Not just this one, all of them. Why I spend weeks researching a cartoon and writing tens of thousands of words about it, and recording in the middle of the night for people who might not even be conscious when they hear this. And I think the answer is connected to everything we've talked about tonight. I make these because I believe that stories matter. That the questions a show asks are just as real as the questions a philosopher asks. That the feelings a cartoon character makes you feel are just as valid as the feelings a novel makes you feel. That art isn't a hierarchy. That a show about a blue cat can stand next to Plato's Republic and hold its own. And I think Gumball would agree with me, because Gumball is a show that refuses to accept the hierarchy of cultural value. It's a kids show that does philosophy. It's a comedy that does tragedy. It's entertainment that does art. And it does all of these things simultaneously, without asking permission, without apologizing, without pretending to be anything other than what it is. A cartoon about a family of animals and objects living in a world made of different media, asking the biggest questions imaginable and answering them with jokes about butts. And if that's not the most beautiful thing in the world, I don't know what is. There's one more thing I want to say before we wrap up. And it's about the question that Gumball leaves open. The question that the show never fully answers, because I don't think it can be answered. And it's this: if the characters know they're in a show, does that make them more real or less? Because on one hand, awareness of your own fictionality seems like it should diminish reality. If you know you're a character in someone else's story, you know your feelings aren't real in the way physical feelings are real. You know your world was designed. You know your suffering serves a narrative purpose, and that should make everything less meaningful. But Gumball argues the opposite. The show argues that awareness makes things more real, not less. Because when Rob knows he's a character and still feels pain, that pain is realer than ignorance. When Gumball knows his world is constructed and still loves his family, that love is more authentic than love that's never been tested by doubt. Knowledge doesn't diminish feeling, it clarifies it. It strips away the illusion and reveals what's underneath. And what's underneath is still something worth protecting. And I don't think we're supposed to resolve this. I don't think the show wants us to. I think Gumball wants us to sit with the question the way Gumball and Darwin sit on that bench next to Sussy, not waiting for an answer, just being present with the mystery, enjoying the mayonnaise. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring about these characters and these questions. Thank you for giving this silly, brilliant, philosophically radical show about a blue cat the attention it deserves. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. Share it with someone who'd appreciate it. And if nothing else, remember, the meaning of life is finding your own way to enjoy it. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.